So there's been something playing on my mind for the last month, and it's this idea of loops and agentic loops. I feel like everyone is saying it now and posting things and sharing things and making it a topic that we have to discuss, but very few people are explaining what it is, where it came from, whether it's important. The narrative has kind of been lost, so I wanted to do my best attempt at explaining why the world's gone loopy. Back in beginning of June, a few people started talking about loops. You had Boris Cherny. He's the person behind Claude Code at Anthropic. He said the quiet thing out loud, and he was like, oh, I don't really prompt Claude anymore. The loops just do that for me. And everyone's like, okay, interesting. And then Peter Steinberger, he's the guy that famously created the open source agent harness called OpenClaw. It was viral at the beginning of the year. He went to OpenAI. OpenClaw has its own foundation now, sponsored by OpenAI. And he said, a controversial thing, he said, stop prompting coding agents. Start designing loops that prompt your agents. And he got a lot of backlash from people. And then Adi Osmani, the guy from Google, gave it a name. He called it loop engineering. And the internet was kind of bifurcated into two different sides. A lot of people said, congratulations, you've invented the for loop. For anyone from a software engineering background, this is not new. This has been around forever. So, a lot of people were like, what are you doing? And then the other group of people on the internet said, most people don't need to know about loop engineering or agentic loops. That's for like the 0.001% of people. You shouldn't be telling people to do this. So that's kind of where we ended up. Now, loops are not new, but the serious version we should be talking about is who controls the loop, because that has changed. And that's where this conversation has matured a lot in the last month. To understand where it's come from, you kind of have to rewind a few years and go through the journey that we've been on with AI in the coding and agent sphere. So if you go back to 2022, it's not that long ago, but you had this concept called REACT, R-E-A-C-T, which is reason, act, and observe. And that was the way that we sort of built the rudimentary agents. You kind of created a loop for these large language models to behave. They would reason, then they would do something, then they would look at the thing they did. That was it. You could kind of create the loop for that and it would work. And it created this new functionality. And then you have this thing called reflection that added feedback and memory, so you kind of built that into the same loop. So then, fast forward to just in the past year, we had the Ralph Wiggum loop. So this is Jeffrey Huntley. He's an Australian open source developer. He created this really crude bash loop. It basically was the way of saying, here's a goal, keep going, check your results, and if you haven't met it, keep going again. And people adopted it. They called it Ralph Wiggum because Ralph Wiggum in The Simpsons is kind of a character that no matter what hits him or phases him, he just plugs away and just keeps going on and just, happy-go-lucky. So Ralph Wiggum was the perfect kind of anthropomorphic example of what this simple agent loop would do, right? And then Andrej Karpathy, he's one of the original OpenAI founders. He's now moved to Anthropic, but he pushes out a lot of his own ideas into the ether so people can pick it up. Anyway, Andrej Karpathy's Autoresearch took it to a next level. It basically said, why not get the model to run an experiment, check the metric, see, based on that evaluation, is this true? Is it good enough or not? If it's not, run again. And you kind of slowly optimize towards an outcome. It's an optimization problem, but with a loop, with an agent. And that kind of works really well. So that went viral, but in a kind of niche capacity, because most people aren't trying to build their own tuned language models. So the thing now is that we've basically taken it to the next step where we've added memory to the loop. So you can now try something else, see if it passes or fails, take what you've learned, commit that to memory, and iterate. But what Boris and Peter have been so provocative about is they've kind of brought it into the mainstream now, where we have a formalized thing. We have a loop specification now. So if you go to Codex, OpenAI's harness, or you go to Claude Code, Anthropic's equivalent, you will have this kind of like /loop or /goal command. And it is basically that loop. It is saying, what's the verification step? of what I need to meet, give it to me really clearly so that I can actually evaluate it, and then I'll just keep going until I either achieve it or just run out of tokens. So now we have these things called agentic loops, and the key thing about them isn't the fact that they can loop, it's the fact that we can have a grown-up formalized specification of when do they reach their goal and when do they stop. And that's what makes them quite interesting. So you can basically have a stack of loops where like one loop does the thing and another loop verifies that the thing that it was going to do got done. And you can slowly, if you imagine like these loops looping into one another, you can start to build entire workflows that are repeatable but verifiable and therefore infinitely scalable, which is kind of their point. So you start to get this situation where like you can imagine the orchestration layer, which is deciding what these agents are doing, that's controlling different loops. And then you can have loops of agents that are building things, and then loops of agents that are verifying the things that are being built, and loops of agents that are committing that to memory and feeding it back and optimizing the overall orchestration. And so it kind of fans out. And the limits of what you define within the harness, so within Claude Code, within Codex, within OpenClaw, within whatever you're doing, you can define these limits, but the potential scale of what you can achieve is enormous. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting. However, this is the grown-up debate. What you can achieve is enormous, but also the failure mode, if it goes wrong, is pretty much infinite. So agents that keep calling models, tools, but doing it wrong and not really achieving the result they need can just burn a hole in your pocket. And you have nothing to prove for it. Because on the one hand, an agent that doesn't stop or that keeps going, doing the wrong thing is a problem. And the problem is partly they're doing the wrong thing, but it's a cost problem right now. So the pushback on people saying most people don't need to use agent loops is kind of valid, because it's a very expensive thing to go wrong. But the counter to that is human in the loop, where you basically have a loop that has a human that is there to verify everything. It doesn't scale. Your value is small and incremental, maybe makes you a bit more efficient, but in all honesty, it's not the exponential improvements and massive opportunity that we've been promised from AI. So it's unrealistic to think that you're going to have a human in the loop at every step. So the answer is that you need loops, and you need provable progress that you can evaluate with other agents in the loop. And what that means is that your human has moved. They've shifted from being in the loop to now being on the loop, and it's a different job, different role. It's a different system, in all honesty. So we simply cannot scale with a human in the loop for all things. We need more of these loops to exist. We need to build around them. But when you do that, everything looks different. You know, more AI output, more loops, more verification means more human activities that need to define what the criteria is that you stop at. Define the guardrails, decide the goals, do the planning, do the reviews, provide a sense of taste and judgment around what on earth you should be doing this for. That then becomes the most important bit. So you've almost shifted left everything. Shift left is a term that comes from a lot of project management, software development, where like everything that used to be further along in the to-do list has moved further ahead. You've shifted it towards the left-hand side. If you do that enough, then the most important thing is to figure out what on earth you're doing, ultimately. Because once you press go, the loops kick in and they just keep going, right? So you can scale tremendously. But if you're pointing in slightly the wrong direction, you're just going to end up in the wrong place. So it makes a really interesting conundrum. Ultimately, we need to think about this differently, where the loop isn't some sort of product. The loop is the new control surface. You can decide how to design and how to set up and how to verify and how to budget for and plan for. It is probably the most important thing to get right, which is, what are we doing this for? What's the measure of success? When do we stop? How much does it cost? All these things are part of real scaled agentic loop engineering. So when people talk about that, that's why. It's been an interesting topic. It's going to evolve a lot more in the next few months. We all need to think through what this means when you have a system of agentic loops that allow infinite scale, where humans cannot and are not in the loop, but instead are on top of it, and making some of the most critical decisions and judgments around what that whole system of control actually builds or does. This is why that's important. This is why the conversation blew up on Twitter and in the sphere that's talking about this. This is why people found it so controversial, because it's not an easy answer. And the pioneers in this, the Borises and the Peters and Adis, they are saying the quiet thing out loud that we'll all be realizing in about 6 months' time. So that's my take. Let me know what you think. Hopefully it's been helpful, and I'll catch you soon.